What's happening, Nerdtopia? I'm back.
He's back. Yay.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Broadcasting in the corner of Dr. Doom's basement, but he's our homie, so we never ever pay rent. N to the E to the Nerdtopia, like a plasma cannon, man, you know we're steady smoking. Yep, comics, books, movies, and video games are our claim to fame and recognition and name. We've changed terrain, but kept it the same, and we hope to gain acclaim from time and again. We're coming at you repeating from Walking Dead, and you know we got pissed when the Redding ran red. A plethora of guests, even more than Bill and Ted. The ratings of the Lost are gonna go to our head. It's dangerous to go alone, your iPod should have us, and Superheroes got our back, and that you can trust. We're blowing up crazy large, like our name was Alderaan, so let's give a hand to Doolin, cause his mic is on word.
All right, so after a long delay and took a bit of a hiatus, decided to come back and start doing episodes of Welcome to Nerdtopia again. It's been a good long while. So joining me here today on my right is Ryan Visingard.
Hey, how's it going, guys? It's good to be back. I'm glad you're doing it, Doolin. I enjoyed it last time.
We did back in the old Nerdtopia cast days. So that's going back 3 or 4 years now. When the original podcast that I did, and when my co-hosts left, and I had to have some people come in and fill some spots. This man on my right came in. He sat in, and we did some podcasting. We talked a little bit about
some really crazy aliens and conspiracies.
That was our fun Halloween episode that we did of Nerdtopia cast, and I think we did one where it was supposed to be something else, but then we just ended up bitching about Smallville for 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's
which is
usually what happens when you talk about Smallville.
It's true. Which is kind of appropriate because this man here on my right he's the Lex Luthor to my Clark Kent from that show. We have a very much a love-hate relationship kind of thing going.
Yes.
And I mean, even your name alone, Visingard. Your name is the supervillain's name.
Yeah, you could kind of go into that if you want to. I'd say I'm a bit of a villain myself. So,
what did you name your son?
Well, originally I wanted to name him Magnus, but my wife was definitely not going for that. So
you got the override on that one.
Oh yeah.
So what did you end up with?
We did Gabriel Xavier Visingard.
Gabriel Xavier Visingard.
Yeah, it is pretty epic. I have to admit.
So. But yeah, it's been great having a son. It's interesting. It's a different experience. It definitely, how do you say, makes you think about these films that we've been seeing.
A little bit, it changes your perspective. And it's kind of cool to be like where we are and now like in the year of like 2016, and it's just, I mean, it was just starting like back in 2012, 2011, that whole time when we originally did the podcast, and it was kind of cool to watch this kind of like golden age of superhero movies kind of up and coming. And now, like, 4 years later, like, we're there now, man.
Yeah, we pretty much are. Well, in some aspects we're there. There are some, differences in what's going on in the movie industry as far as the comic book genre, but it's definitely interesting to see what Marvel's been up to. I mean, they've got some great stuff going on, and then, of course, you've got DC. I'm enjoying DC. Some people are not enjoying DC,
well,
which is fine.
We'll launch into that, but you've got the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you've got the DC Cinematic Universe, and and it's just crazy because if there's a franchise, if there's a movie property or a comic book property to be put in a movie, they're planning it out. Like, it's happening now. If it hasn't happened yet, it will happen here in the next few years.
Well, it seems like Disney's buying up every possible franchise from any kind of 80s to 90s, even the early 2000s, just basically taking over and saying, hey, look, it's us, and we're taking it over, and we're going to buy out everybody and buy up every franchise we can. So
I mean, that's smart marketing. You really can't argue with that. They've got their Marvel Cinematic Universe. It looks like they're in the process of building a brand new Star Wars Cinematic Universe, because we've seen Episode 7 next at the end of next year. I think we've got Episode 8 coming out, and in between this year we've got Rogue One coming out.
Right,
so they're slowly putting the blocks in place, and they're going to start building it up.
They've got some great writers so far. I mean, what they're doing with Marvel as far as letting Marvel do its thing, and it has such an expanded universe in the film industry. And then when you're looking at Star Wars, like you were saying, it's interesting how they're connecting all these films and making actual trilogies that all kind of mix together. And I think it's really smart. It's definitely interesting.
Yeah, you know what's funny though is like I remember like you and I are close to the same age. I remember like when we were kids growing up in like the early '90s, mid '90s, late '80s, like that whole era. To even see a comic book movie back then was like a huge thing, and you gobbled it up because you didn't get to see those. I remember like the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie, as bad as that was, like we just we love even that fucking terrible like Captain America movie they made in the '90s.
Even worse that never got released was the Fantastic Four.
The Fantastic Four movie, which was just I've seen clips from it. I've not watched it.
Looks awesome, but
It couldn't have been any worse
garbage.
could have been any worse than the other two iterations of Doom we've seen in the last couple of years.
Yeah, we won't go.
No, we won't go to that route. But I just remember like all we had back then. This is like before the internet even was. I don't know. It was kind of like the internet pop culture before the internet came around was Wizard magazine, and I remember
Wizard.
Oh God, man, Wizard! I lived for Wizard magazine.
I still got a couple issues back home.
It was great because it was like we didn't have the internet at that point. It was like the only place you could go to actually like read up on this kind of stuff, and it was such a big like nerd fest for that culture. They would even do articles that like if they made the X-Men movie, this is who we'd cast in it,
yeah.
and I would devour that.
They had the drawings and stuff of people writing sketches.
Yes,
it was pretty. Well, it's funny even if you go back and revisit Wizard. I mean, the information that they gave us back then was awesome.
Yeah, it was great,
and it was the only place you could get it basically. So I mean,
and then they had I think Toy Fair magazine, which was made by Wizard, and they had like all of the
previews was another good one. And I'll tell you, as an artist, I loved buying previews because they always had the full on. Shots, and then later I'd say early 90s or late 90s, early 2000s maybe was it Marvel's preview started doing their own thing?
I think so. Yeah, that sounds about right. But and it wasn't until I was I was already out of high school and I was in college, or no, I was just finishing high school. And they had announced they were doing the X-Men movie, and that was huge. That was huge because like finally after all these years and watching them on Saturday morning cartoons and reading the comic books. Finally get to see him on the big screen.
Oh yeah, it was it's mind blowing to think that they actually pulled enough fundage to do it right, and that was what amazed me was like, oh my God, they're doing a movie, and it looks like it's actually going to be good. It's not going to be some garbage that we can all scoff at and laugh at later. So,
and that was like I think that was like 2000, the year 2000. The X-Men, the first one came out, and we're like 16 years later. And that franchise is still rolling, but that kind of set off the chain of events. So, like I think the other studios looked and they said, "Oh,
it's a viable.
We can make comic book movies.
Right.
People want to see this. This is something that we want to do." So then, like you started to see like the first Spider-Man come out, and then Daredevil shortly thereafter, and then the Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, what's interesting is going back and revisiting those films, you can definitely tell that like they weren't really sure where they wanted to go yet, or how they were going to pull it off, or I mean, I think those films turned out really good, but you can see how much it's grown, even in the last 3 or 4 years.
It was uncharted waters at that point.
Right.
But now and over the course of the last couple years, and then by 2008 they started with Iron Man, and that was the start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and like one by one they started kind of putting all these little bricks into place, and they set it up for like the 2012 Avengers, which was just huge. They exploded off of the big
Avengers
screen.
Was fantastic.
I remember actually, I think I still have a copy of the old Nerdtopia cast where we reviewed that, not you and I, but me and my previous host. We reviewed that after having just gone to go see it, and we were like bright-eyed with fanboy wonder, and
to see all those characters brought together
on the screen for the first time, and they did it right.
It's definitely an orgasmic experience.
I would definitely say that. But so that happened, and then DC had been kind of like they'd made their Batman movies. DC Warner Brothers, I guess, has the rights for all the DC properties,
right?
And that's kind of cool. They have all their properties under one umbrella. So they kind of started. Well, they were doing their thing with like the Christian Bale, Chris Nolan movies in 2005. They started with Batman Begins.
Nolan. I mean, the Nolan films were fantastic. Now. They definitely brought in a realistic edge that you hadn't seen in a comic book film before.
Sure. It was a kind of a crime drama with a guy that happened to wear a cape, you know what I mean?
Right. And I thought it was interesting to see the reinterpretation of the different characters, even, down to, let's say, Alfred, for example.
Sure.
Just as a different take on all of it. And it definitely felt, if you could be in a real superhero film, or it could be real in our reality, then that was the film, right? For me, so...
the whole Nolan franchise, like, they did really well, and even, like, Dark Knight Rises, for all its faults, I still felt was pretty good. It was a good movie. Here's my thing. You can have as many plot holes in that movie as you want, as long as you can distract me enough from the plot holes to where as long as I don't catch it right there in the movie theater.
Right, as long as you're not sitting there nitpicking.
Now, if I catch it later on, that's fine, whatever, but you distracted me enough at that point in time to where I wasn't going, wait a minute, how did Bruce Wayne get back to Gotham? You know what I mean?
Right.
I didn't think about it at that time, and that's all that really matters. I can suspend my disbelief long enough. So they did these movies, and the Christopher Nolan franchise wrapped up in 2012, which was the same years that Avengers exploded onto the screen, and that was huge. And they also kind of had their failed Green Lantern property, which went terribly, unfortunately. Which I felt like it was a good idea. They just didn't have the right person at the helm.
It's the right person at the helm. The script wasn't very good. They were trying to flush out too many things so that they could actually start a franchise of some kind. Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, since Marvel's broken onto the scene, realistically, DC is scrambling. I mean, that's just how the nature of the beast. And unfortunately, a lot of their films have flopped. They've fallen short. So
yeah. Yeah, I mean that's unfortunate. But then in 2013, so 3 years ago, they finally ramped up and they said, "Okay, this is it. We're gonna do it. Marvel's doing it. We're gonna do it. It's a smart thing to do. We're gonna have to go ahead and start building our cinematic universe." So they started with Man of Steel. Zack Snyder was at the helm, and he directed it. And I'll ask you first. What do you think of Man of Steel?
I thought it was a great reinterpretation of a modern day mythical superhero.
Absolutely.
There were some things that I wasn't ready to accept as a fan of the Superman franchise.
Sure.
But overall, it standed on its own. I do think it standed on its own. So
yeah, I mean, I agree. It did stand on its own. It certainly wasn't the worst comic book movie I'd ever seen. It was better than Superman Returns, the 2006 version. But I managed to enjoy it.
Well, if you've read Superman Earth 1, have you seen that?
I think I read that one.
I think if you go and actually read that, I think they picked up a lot of stuff from Superman Earth 1. Mm-hmm. It's a frustrated teenage Clark realizing that he's Superman.
Sure.
Same thing, alien invasion. Instead, it was Zod in the film.
Sure.
I think they picked a lot of stuff out of that comic. The problem is, if you're a hardcore Superman fan, which I'm not exactly the biggest Superman fan. Right. I'm definitely an X-Men fan, or some of those other kind of comics. But I think it's interesting. It's definitely interesting. Superman. I don't know how to really grasp what it did, because it kind of changed my perspective on how I looked at that character in a lot of ways, because he's like, he's a little bit more moody.
Yeah, and that's kind of what gets me. Zack Snyder, and I'll jump into this when we finally get to Batman v Superman here. Right. Zack Snyder has a very cool visual style. Like, dude can frame a shot. Like, he knows his way around a camera. It's really cool. It works for really good. It worked for some of these movies, like 300, which is a dark and gritty sort of warrior movie based on the comic book, and then The Watchmen, which is, to this day, love the comic book. Still one of my favorite movies. They changed the ending a little bit, and that's fine. But visually, perfect. It was spot on. Couldn't have been any better. I feel like Zack Snyder works for that. Now the problem there, when you get with Zack Snyder and then the Man of Steel, his version of Superman, is it's very monochromatic and kind of dark. And the issue with that comes that I've always seen Superman as this sort of like big, bright, optimistic character. Like he's all primary colors. And he, where Batman skulks around in the shadows, Superman he's powered by the sun. Right. He's sunny and optimistic, and you can see him coming a mile away. And if you've ever read Birthright, which is a kind of a retelling of the Superman origin. Like, he talks about that. That's why he chose those colors. He's like, I don't want to wear a mask. I want to be out in the open. I want people to see me coming. I want them to know that I don't have anything to hide.
Right.
And so that was kind of like, that was the great thing about Superman and the great contrast he had with Batman. So they do Man of Steel 2013, and then they announce the next movie will be Batman v Superman. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they announced that at Comic-Con one year. I think it might have been like
I think you're right.
Yeah, it was like 2014.
Well, it's probably right after the heels of
it was
by
right,
Marvel.
Right.
Because they've got it, they're trying to do a comeback or whatever. That was exciting. It was exciting to hear that they were going to do it. I thought they were kind of rushing, but I mean, if you look at what Marvel's doing, if you're any other studio, you've got to scramble. So
right, and that's kind of what they did. But when it came down to, by the time they got around to putting out Batman v Superman, which was last month, I think. At that point, we've had 2 Avengers movies. We've had an Ant-Man. We've had 3 Iron Man movies, 2 Hulk movies, 2 Captain America movies, a TV series that ties in, Netflix series that tie in. They've got this huge, massive universe. DC said, okay, this summer they're doing Civil War, Iron Man, and Captain America face off. We're gonna do that. We're gonna go ahead and put out our superhero versus superhero movie. So they did it in one movie. Now, if you go back and you watch Marvel, they've been setting up for that since Avengers. For the last 4 years, they've been building to Iron Man and Captain America going at it.
And Captain America face off. We're gonna do that. We're gonna go ahead and put out our superhero versus superhero movie. So they did it in one movie. Now, if you go back and you watch Marvel, they've been setting up for that since Avengers. For the last 4 years, they've been building to Iron Man and Captain America going at it. Because they had a little spat there in Avengers, and then even in Avengers 2, they were kind of, you could see where their ideologies differ, where they don't always stack up next to each other. So by the time you get around to Civil War, you see these 2 characters. Oh, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and throw this disclaimer in here. If you're still listening at this point, you have not turned it off yet, I'm going to go ahead and throw up the spoiler alert. So hold on. Let me hit the spoiler alert button. Okay, so spoiler alert button has been fired. We are going to be discussing Batman v Superman. We are going to be discussing Civil War. It is the summer of superheroes battling other superheroes. So, why did you like Batman v Superman? And I'll tell you why I didn't like it. It's kind of funny because I'm kind of the quintessential fanboy. I like what the fanboys like. You tend to go the other way with it, which is why we're fixing to fight.
All right.
I enjoyed it. I think because I was ready for like a darker kind of DC.
Sure.
A lot of people weren't really ready for it. I have a tendency to like dark things anyway.
Sure.
And
you're a horror movie guy too.
Exactly. So for me, I mean, was it exactly how I wanted it to be? No. But overall, I felt like the story felt all right.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the fact that they feel like they have to be rushed because in a lot of ways they're introducing characters before they shouldn't introduce them, like Doomsday, for example.
You thought that was a positive then?
I did. I mean, I can't agree totally that they should have thrown him in there right away, but I think overall, I mean, the problem was that, like you said, Man of Steel was so dark.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed Man of Steel. I'm not going to sit there and say I didn't enjoy it. It was just, you have to be ready for them to do such a shift on such a character. You know what I mean? And I know you as a fan would understand, when you're talking about Superman, there's such a myth behind Superman.
Sure, he's an icon.
Exactly. So he's supposed to inspire. So when you have a film that's a little bit grittier and moodier, people aren't going to adapt very well. But I adapted. I was like, all right, they're doing a modern take on it.
Sure.
He feels more like somebody that would be today's Superman, not childhood.
1930s.
Right, exactly. So I accept that.
And I think they even kind of had a nod to that in the movie, too, where Perry White says to Clark, like, this isn't the 1930s, kid. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, they do touch on a little things like that. I mean, but so when you're getting the Batman, Superman, I think basically the reason I liked it was because, to me, it was a Batman movie that just happened to have undertones of Superman, and Superman showed up here and there. I mean, a lot of people say they mixed it well together. I just feel like it was a Batman film, and it was kind of cool to see Doomsday in it.
Right.
And I like the fact that even though they have to rush, they're starting to set up their own cinematic universe. And it's, for me, even though they may not be doing it right in all facets, I am enjoying the fact that they're even attempting to do it, because I feel like us as fans should feel like we're lucky. And, you know, these films, like you said, weren't being made, and when they were back when we were kids, they were trash. I mean, let's face it. They're funny to watch now.
Yeah, they were terrible.
So I feel like we're lucky to even be getting these films, and so when people are tearing them down before they come out,
I never tore it down before they came out, actually. You know, and I actually was the person that went to bat. I did a whole podcast on Ben Affleck's casting as Batman, when everyone was like, "Fuck Batfleck, I don't want Batfleck." I was the person to do a podcast and say that I like Ben Affleck. And actually, believe it or not, I feel like Ben Affleck is one of the strong points of that movie.
I mean, he is. I have to say, like I said, it's a Batman film.
Yeah. There's that. I could say that I felt, as opposed to Civil War, where, you know, we know these characters are well-established characters, and they have very strong convictions, and you give a shit about these characters. You do. So when you actually see them fight, because of their different ideologies, you really kind of root for both of them. You don't really want either one of them to fall, because they both feel like they're doing the right thing.
Right.
And then I guess that's true of any battle. But with Batman v Superman, I feel like since they threw everything together so much, it got to the point where I felt like Batman's an asshole, and Superman isn't much better. Like, it's like, it was just like, I don't like this alien because he has these powers.
I didn't mind the film overall, but from a standpoint on what you're talking about, I can kind of get what you're saying. I didn't see Superman as an asshole necessarily. I just saw him as he's a little less caring, a little less charismatic, a little less... He's kind of like a dull... That's why the colors aren't so bright. He's kind of a dull Superman, and I think a lot of people have a problem taking that character on that way, and like I said, I don't. I kind of like it. It's refreshing to see him do some of the things he does.
Sure.
That's how I feel.
I mean, I guess for me, like, I grew up with, you know, Christopher Reeve was my Superman, and just the big, like, you know, John Williams score as Lois Lane falls out of the helicopter, and then the ba ba da da da, and you see like this bright primary colors coming up and grabbing this helicopter, and like, don't worry, miss, I've got you. You know, like, well, that's my Superman.
I understand that, but I don't mind. Like, a lot of people are raising a fuss. Let's say, for example, in the film, since we're going to be doing spoilers here.
Yeah. Spoiler alert has been sounded.
Okay, so we're talking about. Let's talk about the Lois Lane scene.
Okay,
where he basically takes out the terrorists by blowing them through a wall. I've heard a lot of people giving that particular scene a lot of shit because it's out of Superman's characteristics, and. I mean, we're not talking about Superman of the 90s, the 80s, Christopher Reeves. We're talking about a new interpretation. So I think a lot of people, like I said, get stuck in their head that they can't let go of that. And I understand that. But at the same time, you have to think of Man of Steel Superman. And if that's the Superman we're dealing with, then he kind of fits into this film just fine to me. And that's something that, realistically, if you had superpowers and someone was threatening your girlfriend... Even though it's not Superman, it's something that you would do. And since they're trying to do a modern take on him, I think it's something that a modern superhero would probably do if they, you know. But we are talking about Superman, so
sure. Well, you know, and you know, I can understand that they want to do a new Superman for a new generation. I totally get that. However, like, you know, and I'll even say something else to your credit as well. You know, Christopher Reeve, before he died. One of the last roles he had, because he couldn't really do a lot. You know, he's confined to a wheelchair for a long time before he passed. And his one of the last things he did was he had a recurring role on Smallville. It was a very important role. He was, I think, Dr. Virgil Swan, and he came on and he would...
I remember those episodes because they were very exciting.
They're very exciting
He was
episodes.
the one decoding the
Kryptonian language, and he actually told Clark, "You're from this planet Krypton."
In that scene, when he first appears...
They
You
actually
hear that music,
the John
creep,
Williams,
and
yes,
that gives you goosebumps.
It was good. It was amazing. It
I
was
do
in
miss
season
that
2.
score. I have to admit, even though I don't mind this new interpretation.
Sure.
There are elements of Superman, the originals, that I do miss.
But they asked him, like, why, like, you don't act very much anymore. Why come out of the woodwork and do Smallville, this TV show about Superman? And he said, Christopher Reeve said that, you know what, Superman is such an important part of American mythology. He's our icon. He said the torch needs to be passed. He has to be reinvented for every new generation. And so that was kind of him passing on the torch to, this new Superman, and still kind of keeping the legacy alive. And, it's a good thing he did, because he passed away like a year or two after that.
Right.
And so, Christopher Reeve himself said that the character needs to be reinvented and molded to kind of fit the present time. And I can kind of get behind that to an extent. What I have a hard time getting behind is, what I really love about Superman is that he is this era. He's this not this era. He's this relic of this past time, of these old morals, like these old, he's your grandfather's morals. You know what I mean? And then to put him into this place where he's reckless and he's destructive and he's just like, Bruce Wayne, you're an asshole because you're a vigilante, even though I'm a vigilante. He's kind of hypocritical in that aspect, and that's kind of like where I had a hard time getting behind that. But ultimately, it leads up to Superman's kind of a hypocrite, Batman's kind of an asshole, and it's all being orchestrated by this clownish fucking Lex Luthor.
I have to disagree.
Let's hold on. Let's move on. Let's talk about. We talked about the heroes for Batman v Superman. You saw Civil War, right? Just
yeah,
want to make
I did.
sure. Okay,
did.
So when you come over there, I mean, there's not really much I can do to compare and contrast the two heroes of Batman v Superman to the heroes.
Believe it or not, when you look at what Marvel's doing compared to DC, because I believe the characters are so completely different than anything Marvel really has. I mean, when you think about it, DC was the beginning of comics, Superman and Batman.
Absolutely, they were. They were they were.
A lot of people want to try to say
Superman coined the term superhero. You know what I mean?
It's like a lot of people want to go, okay, well, what is it that, what are they the same? How are they? And believe it or not, after watching Civil War, and
Steve Rogers to me is Clark Kent.
Right.
It's the same character to me. You know what I mean?
Except for
costumes are different, the powers are different, obviously. But to me, it's Superman comes from that time.
Yeah, okay.
The morals. Captain America comes from that time. Literally, in the movies, he comes from that time, and he's put into a modern setting, and he can still uphold those values.
But I think that's because he's from that time period. You see what I'm saying? People are expecting him to have that old world feeling and that old world attitude because he's from that era. So when we're talking about contrast and difference, we're talking about a Superman that's based in this world with terrorism, Donald Trump, whatever you want to call it, the presidential.
Donald Trump would hate Superman.
Well, he's definitely
he's an alien,
the biggest alien we would have on the planet. But
we're going to build a wall around the Earth.
That's
the Kryptonians are going to pay for it.
That's crazy. He definitely would have to kick Superman out, wouldn't he?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of like what Batman was, though. He was kind of Bat Trump. I don't like aliens. I don't like them on my planet. If they're dangerous, they're going to have to kick them out.
But I think that's the biggest thing. Steve Rogers comes from that time period, and the new Superman does not. And so does the new Superman carry the same morals as the old world? And once again, we go back to the fact that, even I'm with you on the fact that I feel like it's just such a different take than what we're used to.
But I almost feel like Superman, even though he's from the modern time, the Zack Snyder Superman, he's from the American heartland. He's the son of a farmer, the son of a farmer.
Right.
You know what I mean? These are just very rigid morals that have been passed down, and plus on top of that, he's from a sheltered part of the country that doesn't see all of that. I mean, you see it on the news.
I mean, I have to admit, yes, from that perspective, you can definitely see that Superman does not portray any of those traits.
Yeah,
I can definitely see that. There isn't enough farm boy that we're used to.
They kind of set it up in the first movie where young Clark Kent saves a bus full of children, and then his father gives him a talking to for like demonstrating his powers in front of people. And young Clark says, "Well, what was I supposed to do? Let him die?" And Kevin Costner just kind of shrugs and goes, "Well, maybe." You know what I mean? And that's not Jonathan Kent to me. So right there, I feel like they got that wrong right off the bat.
Right, because it is definitely Jonathan Kent that instills all that.
Yeah, I mean, he gets his powers from his from his alien father, but he always got his morals from his Earth father. And I feel like that's kind of where they messed it up. And that's another thing too. We have Superman from, so he's a relic from the past, and this one he was kind of a modern Superman taking on a modern Batman. In Civil War, you have Cap, who is a relic from the past, taking on Tony Stark, the modern day hero.
Right.
So it is kind of a clash of times. You know what I mean? It's that generation versus this generation, and I think that's
one
kind
view
of
versus another.
Exactly.
Well, I can definitely see those similar. That is so true, so true. Even I think what's going on in our own
our own country.
Yeah, exactly. What's going on in the world today is there is a clash of
morals between the generations.
The old school.
The millennials blame the baby boomers. The baby boomers blame the millennials.
It just seems a lot more amplified, and I never even thought of it that way, Doolin. Actually,
I didn't either until we started talking about it.
Thinking of seeing the contrast in those films.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually similarities to what's happening with us, so that's great.
And it is kind of cool that you can kind of bring these things to the surface by talking about them. You have now. Let's line up the villains in these two movies. Now, Cap and Superman aren't really the villains. Not Cap and Superman. Cap and Iron Man aren't really the villains in this. They're just the ones that are kind of manipulated in order to fight each other. Just like Batman v Superman, right. Lex Luthor kind of helms it and manipulates them to fight each other.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I forget the name of the villain, the guy that kind of masterminded everything in Captain America. He was something von Strucker. He was related to
Zemo.
It wasn't Zemo. I'll have to look it up. But the guy that kind of orchestrated everything and had them set it up so that they would fight each other. When you get down to that final scene at the end, he was pained. Like they actually wrote it in such a way where you actually felt sympathy for this. Like some people have lost their wives or sons or daughters. This guy lost his wife, his children, and his parents all in the same day, during the events of Avengers 2. And so, you actually feel for him, and when his plan failed, the last thing he was going to do was swallow a bullet before Black Panther stopped him. That comes from a real place, and you see that, and you say, he's an evil asshole, but you could sympathize
when you're pushed against the wall. You'll do anything.
That was his version of justice.
Right.
It wasn't the correct version of justice, but it was his. That's how he saw it.
Right. He also flushed a lot of things out that needed to be addressed within the Avengers team itself.
Absolutely. Civil War was a long time coming. Now, when you have Batman v Superman, you have Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor, and this is one of my biggest grievances of this movie. It's
going to be all right.
This is it. This is where we're going to start going head to head here, because I fucking hated Eisenberg as Luthor. Despised him.
Let me ask you one question.
Okay.
Before we start.
Sure.
Do you like Eisenberg in other films?
Yeah, I like him okay in other films.
Because
sure.
I know a lot of people who hate Eisenberg, the actor, who does a lot of these kind of films where he is kind of tweaky.
He is kind of douchey in some of his roles and everything. And that's
tweaky.
Fine.
He's tweaky. He's he's eccentric. There's a very eccentricness to him, and some people can't handle his acting style, which I happen to enjoy a lot. And I personally liked what he brought to Lex. A lot of people are bitching, and I get it. Mm-hmm. Being a fan of the animated series, I get how people...
Oh my God, I love that version of Lex.
Exactly. Well, that's the Lex that's instilled in a lot of people right now. The business tycoon who's a brilliant scientist behind it all.
Sure.
But I liked Eisenberg's take, especially when people... They tried to remind everybody... that this wasn't really Lex in a way by saying...
I feel like that was kind of a last minute...
It's a cop-out. It
is a last-minute backpedal.
But, still, they went ahead and said, okay, Eisenberg, do your thing. But I like the fact that, once again, we're talking about putting him in a modern setting. So if we're going to wind back the clocks to when Luthor was maybe,
his mid-20s,
Sure.
and he was in control of a business,
Mhm.
and he was a brilliant scientist. You're thinking about the Silicon Valley Lex Luthor, and I feel like that's the Lex they gave you. And a lot of people have discrepancies with it, but I liked it. I thought it was a new modern take on an old villain. I mean, I'm used to the same old Lex, and I wanted something different.
I mean, to me, that would be the equivalent of giving us a Joker that doesn't laugh. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, like I said, I just disagree because once again, I think people have to understand you have to let go of what our pre-notions of what the studios are going to do and what we think they should do with the comics and the cartoons and we keep getting this idea that they have to be a certain way.
I think I kind of don't agree with that a little bit though. I just feel like you have like a certain number of bullet points you have to hit in order to reimagine this character. Lex Luthor got to be older than that. Dude's got to be at least in his 40s or 50s. He's got to be cold, he's got to be calm, and he's got to be calculated.
Well, and that way, then you have to automatically, for me, you have to make Superman as close to Lex's age. Because I feel like when you're thinking about the old Lex Luthor, they're very similar in age and look. You know what I mean?
Well, Superman was always kind of like late 20s, early 30s, ideally. So Henry Cavill's right at the perfect spot.
Right.
And he looks the part and everything. And it was always okay if Lex Luthor was older than Clark Kent, which was fine anyways because he was older, he was more intelligent, he was more.
I mean, we're also let's rewind it all the way back to the 1930s comics and cartoons.
Sure.
Lex was a goofy scientist. He wasn't something that was. He was a mad scientist.
Okay.
And so there wasn't this business kind. How do you say? What would be a great word to describe Lex to you?
In what, the 30s or presently?
Just like it, a lot of people automatically think like business tycoon.
Okay, sure.
Straight jacket.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Three-piece
like
suit,
tie.
vest. Yeah.
Exactly. They have that
Bald
embedded
head.
in him. But I don't think necessarily we have to go that route.
Especially if they're reinventing in a way. That's the biggest thing, I think. That's what the difference is. Like, I'm okay with them changing things completely, and a lot of fans are not. You know, a lot of hardcore fans are just... I'm like, if you're going to destroy it, I guess, if you will... then go ahead and make something completely different and new. And that's the problem, is that people are latching onto different aspects that they want to keep from their childhood or for nostalgia or what they think their interpretation of that character is. Mm-hmm. So for me, I'm okay with them completely changing it. Might as well. You know, if you're not going to stick to the source material, you might as well just do what you want. You know what I mean? And just
so you're more open. You're more open in that respect than a lot of other people are. I think, like you said, and I'm no exception
well, look,
to that.
Okay, I'm going to totally switch things up a little bit for just a second. Okay,
Sure.
So we're talking about the new Ghostbusters, all right?
Sure.
And I've got a friend who completely is like, they hate it. They're hating it.
I do hate it. Once again, I'm the quintessential fanboy. Whatever the majority
gonna
says, I'm usually with them.
And I have to admit, I am the ultimate Ghostbusters fan. It's kind of what got me into building haunted houses and all that stuff.
Awesome.
Okay, so I'm supposed to like automatically be like, yeah, from the preview and from what I've read and from what I see, it's going to be shit. Mm-hmm. But I'm okay. Like, it's okay. I have my Ghostbusters to return to. You have your Superman to return to.
That's true.
We don't have to get so... I think people get wrapped up in this, just like politics, just like anything. They get so wrapped... There you go, see? Wrapped up in this idea of what their childhood or what they thought should be, that I'm like, you know, I'm going to let go. I'm going to be okay with it. You know what I mean? It's like, if I were to really get pissed, I'm like the biggest X-Men mark there is. Mm-hmm. And what are they doing with the X-Men? They're not doing any continuity whatsoever. They're grabbing this, and they're grabbing that, and they're lying, and they're rebooting, and they're time traveling. And I'm okay with it, because I'm just happy
to see it on the screen.
Exactly, at the end of the day. So, but I can totally understand, like, you know, in a lot of ways, I can see how your Superman would feel wrecked by Batman's Superman.
Oh, absolutely.
Destroyed. I mean, he's dimly lit. He doesn't smile. But you also have to take into the context in which what they were trying to do with him. It's almost like he's trying to be a god.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think, personally, depending on what they do with the character, I think you'll see a little bit of a return to your character. That's what I think will happen.
You think that?
I think
all
after
right.
this-
So once again, we did say spoilers. So after Superman was killed off at the end of that movie,
Right.
we see the funeral of Superman, and then it pretty much comes right out and tells you, without coming right out and telling you, that they will resurrect Superman as he was resurrected in the comics, completely doing a complete 360 on the messianic images that we've seen, because they've been playing him up as the Messiah since the last movie.
And I think that
Which-
character, in a lot of ways, I think if you dive into Superman, the modern day take on him in these films,
Yeah.
he is trying to live up to that God thing, and that's what that sadness to that character is.
Sure.
You know
Because
what I mean?
because he's a man.
He
essentially.
thinks he has to live up to this godlike
he's
image
a man.
that people are creating.
So instead of him being like in the comic books in the earlier movie, he's essentially just a god.
Right.
And this one, he is a man that has the powers of God, and
it's coming to the conclusion that I can't
and if you
save
look at
everybody.
sure.
And I think that's the real world view that he's
Mm-hmm.
trying to put on this Superman. And I think that's why there's such an emphasis in Batman versus Superman of the God complex and the whole, like, I think that's why I liked Lex, because Lex kind of flushes that out. He's talking about him being an alien and
Sure.
how he's not a god and he shouldn't try to live up to these expectations. And
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? So for me, that's I think... And that's why I said I'm returning to the fact that I think you will see a return, not only because of the fans,
Yeah.
but I also think that that's been a long-term plan. Is like he's trying to be something, and then he's gonna come back and be like, I'm relaxed with the fact that I'm Superman, and
Yeah.
I'm okay with it. I mean, I think that's the character's battle, is that he's like, am I Clark? Am I Superman? What world do I live from?
Sure.
What kind of morals do I have? Can I save everybody? I think that weight would give... And that's why I liked this interpretation of Superman, is that when you start diving into it like that, there's a weight to him, and you can kind of feel like, well, this would suck. I'm trying to do the right thing, and
Because most of us
everybody's-
would like, hey, would you like these powers? And 99% of us would say, hell yeah, I want those powers. But you don't stop to consider everything that comes with it.
Right, well,
everything that happens that you didn't stop or prevent is somehow your fault.
Not only that, but if we're talking in this context that he's trying to be like more like what we're going through right now. When you think about it, it's a lot of negativity out there right now, and I think that the way they treated Superman in the movie was exactly how we would end up treating it here. You'd have 50% of the populace being like, he's going to be a hero, he needs to be our god, he's going to save us all, and then the other half would be like, burn him at the stake, he's a piece of shit. I mean, and I think that that's kind of in these films, and I think that's why people can't really grab onto it, especially older fans can't grab onto it, because that's not really Superman. Superman instills hope. Superman is brightly lit.
Right.
Superman's saving trees, cats from trees.
Sure.
And that Superman's gone, and he's put this real world weight to Superman, and I think people just can't grab it.
And that's it's interesting that you bring that up too, because with the resurrection essentially coming up possibly in the next movie, or possibly by the time they do Justice
I
League.
do hope that they do like a Search for Spock thing, where like they have an idea that he's back, but it's a whole movie before you see him, so that we can
Right.
build up Justice League right, and we can introduce characters right, because when you have Superman, he can take out everybody.
He overshadows everybody. Absolutely.
Exactly.
But and what really bothers me is like for the death of Superman, which is something that they drew from very heavily on this, introducing Doomsday in their own bastardized version of it. You know what? Whatever, they put Doomsday on the screen. However they got there.
I was praying it was Brainiac, but whatever.
Anyways,
we won't even go into.
It's
this
like
anymore.
in the comic books, we had hundreds, thousands of comic books before 1994 when they killed Superman. And that was a huge... I mean, I remember standing in line at Tropic Comics in Vero Beach with my dad that Saturday morning. Line going out the door, wrapped around the block.
It changed the comic
waiting
landscape.
to get my copy of that comic book. And it was huge, because it was the first time they ever killed anybody. And I feel like if you are going to kill that character, it has to hold that weight.
Right.
They did it in the second movie,
Right.
Movie number 2, and I was just like, I didn't feel anything.
Okay, so hopefully, and we're speculating here.
Sure.
I am.
Sure.
I'm hoping, And basically, I think that, like I said, I'm hoping that DC catches on and says, okay, because we killed him, we can bring him back the way the fans really wanted,
want it.
because he wasn't received exactly how he should have been received.
With red underoos, baby.
You and your damn red underoos. Get rid of those damn things.
Well, you know what?
I'm okay with the 52.
I'll still wear them around the house sometimes. So,
but I think we'll see a return to that more. I'm hoping, like I
well,
said,
you know, if
speculation.
he's as much of as a Christ character as they build him up to be, then maybe by the time that Christ didn't in the Bible didn't realize his full potential until he died and was resurrected, and so maybe this will be something very similar to that. Like, he was a man. Now he's reborn anew as a god.
Right.
Just thinking. I mean, like, you know what? Here's the thing: is I can sit here and I can bitch about it all day, but I'm not gonna lie to you, man. When the next one comes out, they're gonna get my $5-10 at the movie theater.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
I'll pay for it
just to see what they're doing with it.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Are they bastardizing it, or are they making it cool?
So I can sit here and bitch about it and make a podcast about it.
Exactly. I do think DC has a chance to recover. I think fans need to lay off a little bit. I think it's the pressure.
The fans are really rough. I'll give them that.
I mean, they can destroy your career before you even start.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just because, well, let's say, you don't put a certain character in there and they just completely flip. That's not how it's going to be.
Look at the Fantastic Four reboot. I mean,
they destroyed
and
it.
I'm guilty of that. If you go back and watch the last episode I did of this, I ripped apart
but
the
you
Fantastic
guys were
Four.
Right, though. I mean,
we were right, but that's
but
I was brutal. If you go back and watch that podcast, I was brutal. I brutally attacked Josh Trank for that.
Right. I had hopes, just like anybody. Oh, maybe he'll give a different spin on it, but definitely, like I said, Fantastic Four is definitely a property you shouldn't screw with too much. Going back to the Batman versus Superman.
Sure.
Now, what did you feel about Batman? How did you feel?
I felt like, okay,
I've heard a lot of people complain about this too, and I'm like, I felt like it was Batman.
I felt like it was, in a lot of ways, he was the most accurate on-screen Batman from the comic books that I had seen up until that point. The way he moves, the way he fights, like his gadget, how he's resourceful, how he's ready for every possible thing, and how he is a man that stands toe-to-toe with gods. That's what I always loved about Batman. What I didn't like about him was essentially they made him this like xenophobic asshole that Batman's not so closed-minded to where he's gonna be like, well, he has powers, so even if he's not our foe, he's dangerous and could burn down the entire planet. And then in addition to that, and the one that kind of sealed the deal for me that made me go, this isn't quite the Batman I want to see, is the Bat brand of justice, which is basically where if you are a really, really, really just a bad person, right before he leaves you for the cops, he busts out his little Batman brand and brands your neck with searing hot metal, because fuck criminals, that's why, which essentially, if you go to prison with that Bat brand on your neck or anywhere on your body, the inmates will kill you. So he's indirect, he's like, I'm not going to kill you, but the people in Arkham will.
Right.
And they're like, we got ourselves a child molester here, boys.
Well, I can see.
By the way, if it was a child molester, they'd know you don't need the Bat brand in order for that to happen. I'm just saying.
I didn't have a problem with the Bat brand, and I didn't have a problem with the scene where they threw the grenade back. The Bat brand, I can kind of see, like, once again, we're going back to what kind of Batman would be in this modern day.
Sure.
Would it be someone who straight up is a vigilante? See, Superman kind of, he's a vigilante, but he's not a vigilante.
Well, he's not a street level vigilante. You know what I mean?
Batman is a street level.
Sure.
We also don't know which direction DC is really going to do with this Batman and what kind of different backstories and what has kind of made him. I know that they've based it, somewhat on Frank Miller.
Sure.
But I don't have a problem with the idea that he would basically throw a grenade back at the bad guys if they threw one at him.
Sure.
Now, I can see how there would be a problem with the branding because you're like, okay, well, that's not what Batman would do. Batman wouldn't brand you so you would get killed in prison. That's not the kind of guy he is.
Right.
And I'm like, well, I don't necessarily agree with that. Now, we're talking about Batman. We're not talking about Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne wouldn't do that. But is there more Batman than Bruce Wayne from this character? I mean, he seems like he's seasonal.
I mean, I'm even
dark,
okay with the fact of if they do like this next standalone Batman movie, which word around water cooler is they're going to have Ben Affleck write and direct it, which I'm all for that because I feel like he's a great filmmaker.
Well, he's gonna make a good film. I think they need to let him do his
But
thing.
if they have it to where like he took a darker turn after Jason Todd died, because you can tell that they have he's got
some kind of homage. See, that's one of the things. I think, like I said, a lot of fans are ripping it down, but they haven't given it a chance to develop either. Right. You know what I mean? Like, we don't really know what is compiling or pushing this Batman's motives. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And like you said, we get glimpses, but we really don't get any kind of backstory for him. And I think that's one, they don't want to waste time on a backstory because they can explain it later. Mm-hmm. And I also think that fans are burnt out. They know who Bruce Wayne is. They know his parents died. I know a lot of people were bitching about them having his parents die in the film again. I'm like, it's just setting up.
I mean, I was okay with that. It was a quick flashback. I'm okay with it because once again we're reintroducing Batman. They didn't do a whole lot with the origin. That wasn't even really.
But like I said,
issue.
my thing is when you go back to it, we're talking about a modern day interpretation, and I believe that a modern day Batman that would be dealing with modern day criminals in our societies would do it.
Fair enough, but moving on from this though, because this is the other beef that I had in that. Once again in Civil War. As opposed to Batman v Superman, the motivations were solid. I believed that each one of these people believed that what they were fighting for, what they were fighting the other person for. Batman v Superman, it was thinner. It was very thin because they had just introduced this character. Now we have to make him go in and fight. And when you come around to the resolution, the thing that makes them stop fighting, with Tony Stark and Captain America. The battle was it was over at that point. Cap almost killed Tony. Didn't quite, but walked away from him.
Right.
And then,
but they didn't, it wasn't a makeup thing and they didn't
It
team
wasn't
up
really a makeup thing. It wasn't a makeup thing. They didn't
wasn't a
team up
happy
together.
ending, really.
It wasn't. But then, Tony actually receives a letter from Steve Rogers
explaining his side of things.
I mean, and that they're gonna bury the hatchet.
Eventually
They'll bury the hatchet.
There's going to be some hard feelings for a while, and I like the idea of having two teams split, and I think that Marvel's smart enough to keep it that way for a while.
Plus, we're introducing new characters all the time through movies and stuff.
But once again, we're talking about Tony sitting there. His reaction on his face is, definitely they're not going to be enemies forever, and he kind of gets why.
Yeah, he gets why. He understood then. But with
you don't
Batman
feel like
v
it's
Superman,
so flushed out, do you? You don't feel like it's
it's
kind of superficial.
It's very superficial.
And I think that's because, one, we're talking about them rushing. And two, we're talking about an alien versus, so Batman is afraid of an alien who's come here who could burn down the planet. Sure. That's not a real world kind of view. I think that's what makes Civil War so much different, is that the characters are put into situations that are almost more realistic as far as tone, as far as feeling. I mean, that's why it's kind of like, Batman, he's going to fight Superman because he's an alien and he could potentially harm the whole planet.
Sure.
Is a lot different than, okay, I don't want to do any spoilers for Civil War since it's so new, but basically
we're doing spoilers. We always sounded the alarm. Spoiler.
So basically, we're talking about showing the video of his Tony's parents being killed.
Sure.
Is so more impactful story-wise that you feel like, and then you also understand that Tony's just trying to protect what he's already got.
Right.
And Steve's like, hey, look, I just can't let bad shit happen whether they want me to go protect people or not. I have to do what's right to me.
Right.
It's a much more compelling in the story, and like you said, I think it's because of the history too. Marvel, it's so more believable and so more, how do you say? It's not believable, but it feels real. It feels more real because they have such a backstory to these characters and they've built them up.
Sure.
I think that's the difference. That's why Superman versus or Batman versus Superman, it feels somewhat shallow because it is rushed at the end of the day.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, here's a bunch of
it's
shit.
like
so
it's
we
like
can get
it's
it
like you put
started.
in Doomsday and then you put in Wonder Woman and then you have little cameos from the Flash and Aquaman and Cyborg.
I won't even say they.
And
Were,
it's-
I mean, it's even those
they
cameos
were just
look
kind of they were just kind of introducing
kinda
the
garbage.
characters.
It was garbage.
And as opposed to
But-
like where they're in this movie where like they you have Black Widow and they introduce Black Panther and they introduce Spider-Man.
Well, I have
for
to
the
admit,
first
like,
time. And
I
it was well done.
Civil War felt smooth and fluid, and every character didn't feel like it was just pushed in to be pushed in.
Like they all had a place there, and even one could argue that Spider-Man was kind of pushed in because like Sony had finally like came to an agreement with Marvel Studios while they were filming that movie. They went back and reshot some of those scenes just so they could put Spider-Man in. So one could argue that Spider-Man was kind of shoehorned in, but you know what? I didn't
It felt
really
right.
mind. It felt right.
It felt right. It felt smooth, and I
Yeah.
think that's the contrast that we're talking about between Batman versus Superman. I think this is why the fans are so upset and why it doesn't feel right exactly. You know, when you're sitting in the theater, just something's off, and it could be Superman or it could be your idea of what Batman is. But I think overall, what it is they're scrambling, they're rushing.
Yeah.
But like overall, as a film itself, I didn't think it was bad. I thought it was a good story. I thought they kind of flushed out the characters enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I mean, I get it, being a fanboy like you guys, but I can let go. I'm just like, all right, screw it. I'm just going to enjoy it for what it is. I'm not going to freak out. You know, I felt like the film itself was it felt good to see them both on screen again. It felt cool to see them in a new light, a new interpretation.
Sure.
Like I said, I loved Eisenberg for all the wrong reasons, I guess. But overall, I felt like the film as a whole wasn't that bad. It's not as bad as people were receiving it as that. I think that that's because they just can't let go of their past. They can't let go of the idea of what Superman is. And because they don't seem to have any sympathy with the fact that these studios are scrambling to catch up to Marvel. Marvel has a leg up, and it's going to continue to have a leg up, and they have to give these other studios little.
That's why
leeway.
I feel like maybe they should have just said, okay, you know what? Marvel won the race. Let's just be in the running at this point, because by the time Marvel peaks with like Avengers 3, Part 1, Part 2, and then going into Phase 4, because I feel like that's going to be the peak for Marvel. DC will be just getting warmed up at that point. So I feel like, you know, and I agree with you. We all have our own interpretations of the way we want to see our superheroes, and Warner Brothers didn't do that. They didn't go that route.
Well, we can go back to Nolan. We can blame Nolan. Because Nolan made a successful franchise
By going a
do
different
the
way. with
dark
it.
and like gritty and the.
But that was Batman.
But DC saw an opportunity and said, "Well, maybe we should make ourselves different from Marvel by making more of an adult film."
Yeah.
And I think that's another reason people don't like Superman in these films is because he's an adult Superman. He's not a kid's Superman anymore. And that's like I said. Overall, I don't have a problem with it, but. I get upset nowadays because they'll beat these films up. One, we're lucky to have them. And two, they're not going to be exactly what we thought they were going to be, and they're never going to live up to the pedestal. I do get how Marvel fans are like, well, it's not you're right, it's not Marvel, and quit comparing it to Marvel because they've got a shit ton of catching up to do.
Yeah.
Give the franchises a chance.
Dude.
But I get it. It's like it's bittersweet for me. I get it. I get why people are angry. It does feel rushed. There are some elements they shouldn't have pushed in there. They could have flushed out the characters more. It could have been more like the animated series or something like that where they build things in. But once again, we're talking about money and studios. So I mean, there's a whole flip side to this. I'm not just talking as a fanboy. As a fanboy, I guess I could agree with you guys and say, yes, everything you said about it was right. But when you flip it and think about, well, are they being rushed? Yes. Are they trying to put this new kind of feel to it and make it more gritty and feel like it's an adult film? Yes, they're going the Watchmen route. They're going the Dark Knight route. So, but the problem is, give it a chance. Slow down and quit hating it so much that you're blinded by your hatred for the character. And
I have foreseen.
and allow yourself to enjoy the fact that they're on screen. And where will they go with it? Are they going to fix it? Because the key is, you're right. At the end of the day, if we don't like it, we won't go see it, and they'll have to change it. And so they have seen this with Batman versus Superman.
Yeah.
So hopefully they will start taking the steps that they need.
I think did Zack Snyder? I think he might have stepped down at this point.
I'm hearing rumors about it. I haven't heard exactly how it's going. He's
check
probably
that,
didn't step down. He's probably asked to step
or he
down.
might be. I think he might have taken up a producer role instead of a director role. I would have to check the. I would have to check the validity of that, but I think I might have read it somewhere.
But like I said, I've heard some rumors. Like I said, that's why I think if we just sit back and relax a little bit, they're gonna fix it enough to where we'll be satisfied. I'm hoping
by the time Justice League rolls
well,
around.
and I think the other problem is I think it's funny that I don't see half as I get it, but I don't see half as many problems with Suicide Squad as they do with Batman versus Superman, and they're coming from the same cinematic universe, and it's tied into all of it because they said from the start, just like Marvel, they're going to have a continuous story that goes through every film. So, like, a lot of people are like, "Oh, it's going to be great, Suicide Squad, yeah." They're not beating it up quite like Batman versus Superman, which is a surprise to me.
Well, hopefully they can kind of, after they've built this up, have an infrastructure to where they can have a cohesive story that spans all these movies. I mean, it takes an incredible amount of work like that, and in Marvel Studios has this brilliant staff of producers and writers that have strung everything together in such a masterful way that we have things like Captain America 3 Civil War, that we have things like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., like we have like 2 seasons of Daredevil that introduces all the street level heroes and ties in Iron Fist and Luke Cage and Jessica Jones. Yeah, it's massive. So obviously they're behind. Hopefully in the future they can kind of bring it together. And as much as I hate on it, and as much as other people you've heard hate on it, you know damn well we're going to buy a ticket to see it when it comes out.
Well, we all did. I mean,
we all did.
Ticket sales. So,
Time out here.
How far back did we lose?
No, we didn't lose anything. It's just.
The video.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we're getting. That's pretty good.
We're about at the hour mark. So
Yeah.
we're about done here. I'm wrapping it up. Let's see here. Go ahead and wrap it up on this last one.
But like you were saying, I think overall the fans just chill out. You're gonna get what you want. Eventually.
Yes.
And they have. It's kind of weird. We'll go all the way back to when we started podcasting. What we were talking about then. DC is kind of at that level where it's more like those Marvel films that were coming out in the 90s. Okay, and they just need a chance. Everybody take a breath. It's gonna be all right. Your favorite characters will be interpreted the right way eventually. Don't hate on Batman versus Superman. It was good. I liked it. I enjoyed it. And I know you hate Eisenberg, but
I do hate Eisenberg. But
okay.
You know what?
I've heard everybody hate Eisenberg. I'm like the only Eisenberg fan.
The only thing I can say about that is should have been Bryan Cranston.
I want to argue with you so
But we're about out of time, so we're gonna go ahead and bring it to a close. So, Batman v Superman, the DC movie franchise, just getting warmed up, and we're like finally seeing the fruition of Phase 3 as we go into Avengers 3 in the next couple of years. It's whether you like it, whether you hate it, it's an exciting time to be a comic book fan.
Exactly.
We are in this the golden age of
and just a
comic book
couple
movies.
weeks we're gonna have the X-Men, and a lot of my friends are pissed because I like Apocalypse, even if he looks like Ivan Ooze.
I met Apocalypse. I met the actor like not
Maybe
too
we'll
long
have
ago.
to save that for the next one.
Maybe we will. But anyways, we're going to go ahead and bring it to a close. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us.
Always, man. It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for welcome to Nerdtopia. I'm Doolin Dalton.
I'm Ryan Visingard.
And thanks for joining us. Thanks for nerding out with us, guys. Have a good night.